Welcome to Commit and Push, the podcast about how great software really gets built. I'm Damien Filiatrault, your host and the founder of Scalable Path. Each episode, I talk with founders, developers, and leaders about the decisions, trade-offs, and hard lessons behind successful digital products. Let's get into it. Here with Eric Ries. He's the author of multiple books, including the very well-known Lean Startup. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying I'm a big fan of the Lean Startup.
Thank you.
And although I haven't read your new book, Incorruptible, yet, I've found a surprising amount of information about what it's going to be in it on Gemini. I don't know how, but I think that comes out in late May. Is that right?
Yeah, May 26th.
Cool. And I want to spend a good amount of time discussing that book, but I'd also like to touch somewhat on the Lean Startup as well, if you're cool with that.
Sure.
Cool. And so do you want to just start us off by sharing a bit about your background, what led you to write the Lean Startup, and then how that journey continued and led you to write your new book?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Where to start? So I was a computer programmer as a kid. I'm one of those kids who discovered computer programming. My dad brought home a beige IBM XT with a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. For those that know what that is, I'm not joking. This is literally the kind of floppy disk where they use a rubber band to power the inner coils. This is old school technology. And from the moment he brought it home, and I found out you could program it, that's all I wanted to do. And so, that was my childhood, just becoming obsessed with computer programming, and being so interested in it as this like magical force that could translate ideas directly from your mind into the real world. It actually felt like I was living a role-playing game, like I had become a wizard, for real. Yeah. And I thought I'd be a computer programmer my whole life. I couldn't believe when I found out you could get paid for computer programming. Like it was a job you could do. Then I was like, man, if I hit the jackpot, this is incredible. So that's all I wanted to do. I was a computer science major. I was an intern at Microsoft. Like I did all the things that would put you on a very normal, like I'm going to be a computer programmer career path. Mm-hmm. But I happened to be in college during the dot-com bubble. So that's how entrepreneurship came crashing into my life, not because I knew anything about it or even especially wanted to run a business, but because that's what technology people were supposed to do. And I was like, okay, if that's the way to make a product and have it impact a lot of people, I'll do it. And I was not that good at running a company. I didn't even know what a company was. My friends and I were so incompetent. It's embarrassing to look at it now. And so we dropped out of school. We did a startup. It totally failed. We barely graduated late. That's how quickly we died, because we happened to be, last. We were like the last startup funded in the dot-com bubble. I mean, we were very late to the party. Anyway, but the intoxication of this idea that you could build a team to build a product to change the world, you didn't have to wait for some manager to give you permission. You didn't have to be part of some bureaucratic machine. Mm-hmm. That was just really intoxicating to me. And so I wanted to come learn how it was done right. I was like, I definitely am terrible at this, but I'd like to see how it's done properly. And so where do you go? You want to make a movie, you go to Hollywood. Want to make a startup, you go to Silicon Valley. So that's where I went. And I applied to jobs all up and down Silicon Valley, joined a really hot post-dot-com era startup, and had the experience, as I tell in the book, The Lean Startup, of watching people make the same mistakes I was making in my dorm room, but like 2 orders of magnitude more expensive. Mm-hmm. And being like, wait a second, well, hold on. I thought I was coming out here to learn how this is done properly, and yet we're all having the same dumb experiences over and over again. And that was the beginning of my education, really, into what are our conventional management best practices. Why are they what they are? And how come they don't work very well in a high uncertainty environment like a startup? And after having some success in Silicon Valley and doing some work in my own career, started to develop a set of practices around how startups should be built in a more ethical, more humane, more scientific, more iterative way. That ultimately led to the Lean Startup, borrowing ideas from lean manufacturing, applying them to entrepreneurship itself. I still thought of myself when I was writing that book as an engineer, first and foremost, a technical co-founder, a startup person. But publishing that book totally changed my life. And all of a sudden, I got ripped out of my really very small Silicon Valley world and given this backstage pass to the world of business, which is so unimaginably vast. I still meet when I'm out speaking and touring and meeting companies, like I still meet people who are like, forget like, is AI here to stay? They'll be like, is the internet here to stay? Is it just a passing fad? Like, what about mobile? Is mobile a thing? And you're like, oh, I think it's a thing, my friend. Like, because as obvious as some idea is, if you're like in the technology industry and you're reading the press every day and you're focused on the latest releases, like you feel like these ideas are old. And yet disruptive waves, it takes time to penetrate. And there are people and places on this earth where what we thought was cutting edge like 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago is now what they're just finding out about. So anyway, so it was really interesting to see business up close and personal. I got to work with every kind and size of company you can imagine. I mean, really, you name a sector, size, combination, I've been there. You've named an industry, product category. Like I've had a chance to help people who want to do innovation there, from companies that are decades or hundreds of years old to hot startups and everything in between. And so it was really a really interesting education. It was very fun. I learned a ton. I wrote another book about it called The Startup Way. Corporate innovation people know me more for the red book than for the blue book, which is interesting. And what Yet through all this experience of helping so many people build a superior management system, I always felt like we were up against this other force I couldn't name that was like undoing all the progress we would make. Like I would help even a giant company make a massive organizational transformation, and then like 12 people in a boardroom would just undo it with a snap of fingers. Not because they were trying to undo it, but because something else was going on. Meanwhile, I helped all these people build companies. Lean Startup was such a success that many of its early devotees are now independently wealthy billionaires. They took their company public. I got to go through that whole journey with them. And yet, although a lot of them made a lot of money, a lot of them are today like pretty miserable. And the company doesn't really reflect the idealism and the promise that it originally had. Like something really essential was lost. And I started to feel like I was helping feed one company after another into a meat grinder. And I just like my work the last, gosh, almost 10 years now has been to try to figure out what would we have to do to stop this meat grinder from turning?
Mm-hmm.
Why are things the way they are, and how could we make a difference? So I wound up building something called the Long-Term Stock Exchange, which is the first new SEC regulated exchange to have like a place to list companies on, really since the creation of NASDAQ 50 years ago. And so I've been kind of hammering on this question of like, how do we create the infrastructure, the culture, the practices, the mindset necessary to create really mission-driven long-term companies that don't fall into this trap where this invisible force rips them apart.
So this long-term stock exchange, does this exist now? This exists.
Yeah,
And
it is an SEC regulated exchange. It is a list company. It trades all the same stocks that NYSE and NASDAQ trade. I don't run the company anymore. I turned it over to a professional management team a couple years ago so that I could work full time pretty much on this book. But yeah, we got it approved by the SEC. We listed our first customers, and it's a real going concern, as they say.
well, I'm kind of debating on whether to dive deep into that right off the bat, because I kind of want to, where I want to take this is touch a little bit on lean startup, and then maybe transition. There was a couple case studies that I wanted to bring up that from the lean startup that I was kind of curious about.
Sure, yeah, whatever you like.
So just to, you mentioned some of this, but there's a lot of concepts in the lean startup that I think we as software developers and entrepreneurs might think are totally normal now, like MVP, but they probably weren't when you wrote that book.
No, not at all.
And one of the case studies that you mention as a sort of a success story, or a good practice, was this company called Aardvark. And they, you kind of praised them for, spending very little money up front to, you're supposed to test your assumptions and, get a product out there that users can give you feedback on. And they ultimately wanted to have an AI product, but they did what you called a concierge MVP. And the first user or users, I can't remember how many they had, but they would interact with just a front end, and then there was really no real technology behind the scenes like powering it. It was just humans kind of
Hmm.
acting like the product. And I thought, okay, when I first read that, that was cool. And then, this company that I heard about a year or two ago, I used to see them at conferences, Builder.ai,
Hmm.
and came to my mind. And I thought, there's something kind of similar about this because I don't know if you know Builder.ai,
Mm-mm.
but
No.
they were like, you know, they were kind of like Lovable. Are you familiar with Lovable?
Yeah, of course.
Kind of like vibe code, like allowing people who are not programmers to build web applications or websites, right? And so they were all over the place. I think they raised a ton of money. And turns out that behind the scenes, there was, I don't know how many, like 600 or 900 developers in India that were actually just writing the code, right? And I'm thinking, on the one hand, this is sort of like lean startup, like what they propose. But on the other hand, it's like, where does it draw the line between, just being straight up unethical or misleading? And I wonder, I don't really know whether they intended to do that,
Hmm.
whether that was
Hmm.
their whole plan to sort of deceive people, or whether they just sort of started getting momentum and then they couldn't figure out the technology, how to execute it well. And so they had to just keep going with this manual solution. But
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I can easily see that happening. Yeah.
I don't know if you had experienced cases like this or you had
Of
any
course. Oh
thoughts
yeah.
on this
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I've seen both sides of it. Okay, the first thing is this problem is very easy to avoid if you just disclose everything. Okay, so like a lot of people misunderstand Wizard of Oz testing, concierge MVP, as requiring a certain amount of deception. And it's simply not true. You're better off just telling people what's going on. There's really no need to be deceptive about it. And engineers are always afraid to do this because they assume that customers really would value automation when in fact most customers find automation like quite scary. So actually, like a
Hmm.
lot of customers will be like, "Oh, you have it's an artisanal, small batch, handcrafted solution." I much prefer that to an automated solution. So it's better off to just tell people what's going on. Now, the sequence in which you tell them, still requires some art. You got to be careful about it. A lot of engineers are like, "Oh, if you say I have to disclose if I have to disclose everything, in that case, I have to like before I allow you to even look at my product, I have to give you like 20 pages of disclosures and be like, oh, I suck. Disclosure, I suck at engineering, and my technology doesn't work. And it's like, look, most customers already think that, so you don't need to disclose that. It's okay, right? Like that's not a big deal. You can just like do your product the way you normally would, and over the course of people using it, make sure you reveal to them, what's going on, including like if it's coming soon, just say coming soon. It's fine to have people sign up for a waiting list. Like I'll never forget in the book I told this story in a long time. The original MVP of Dropbox was just a little video. They didn't trick anybody. They just showed people what they planned for the product to look like. That was enough. So deception is really never necessary for these things to be effective. But the second thing is, okay, you can mess up like imagine they got the disclosure right, but like they still messed it up, right? You can imagine a situation where like the disclosure is like in the footer somewhere and people basically don't read it, and now it's starting to grow. The second trap people fall into is they really don't understand what progress in a startup means. And it's so easy when I explain it. People are like, oh, yeah, obviously, duh, makes perfect sense. Build, measure, learn, feedback loop, the whole lean startup thing. The idea was code, revenue, customers, traction are not the unit of progress. Learning, what we call validated or scientific learning, is the unit of progress. Everyone's like, yeah, sure, who wouldn't want learning? But actually, most founders find this idea repulsive, really hard to live with. Because if number go up, I want number go more up. It's like the ooga booga of entrepreneurship. And it's like the lizard brain we all have. We all
Hmm.
say, sure, sure, learning. But like, you see the number going up. I've seen people with the most pathetically small customer bases be like, sorry, I cannot risk it going up. And I'm like, I think if it doesn't go up, like, I don't understand that it went up by 10% a month, but you started with 10 people. So like, it's okay. It can go up by 5% this month and it will be okay. Like that's actually not what's important. What's important is, are you actually learning what you need to learn to prove out that the thesis of what this make this company valuable actually is? And like and Wizard of Oz test and concierge MVP are dangerous in this exact way, because you start to get excited about all this revenue you're making, not even paying any attention to the fact that the costs are greatly exceeding your revenue. So you're actually losing, you're losing money and making it up in volume. And you're like, I got to get as big fast. And it's like, no. Who said it? Who needs you need to get big? We need to learn how to actually deliver this experience. Now, what's sad about the companies that blow themselves up over this addiction is very often they are wasting incredible amounts of money on stuff that customers don't care about. And we see this now with AI. Like, AI makes a lot of these experiments, allows us to do experiments like this, like, way cheaper than used to be. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, before generative AI became popular, I even remember before people had really heard about ChatGPT, I remember showing civilians of all kinds GPT-2, GPT-3 outputs to warn them about what was coming. This is before you could just like chat with it. You had to like go into the developer console and do the sentence completion stuff and whatever. But like I had access to that technology back then. And I remember showing people, I'm like, look, you need to be aware this technology is getting better every day and it's coming for you and your job and things you need to know about. And they'd always be like, yeah, but this kind of sucks. And be like, okay, you're making the talking dog mistake here. What's impressive about a talking dog is not what he says, but that the dog is talking to you, okay? Like I would show people, like, here's, they'd be like, yeah, but this isn't as good as a first-year law student, like, essay. I'm like, uh-huh. But it's recognizably a law student essay, right? Like, so what we've learned, like, but you see people, like, are so quick to judge if something's not good enough, it must not be good at all. And in fact, now that these products are widespread, we've seen tons and tons and tons of situations where people are very happy to accept what we would have before said was a woefully inadequate output because it meets their actual need. And so we see that a lot. Like, do you have the courage? Do you have the skill to like really think deeply about, okay, now that I found a problem that customers want solving, like what would it take to radically solve this problem in an economic way, using whatever combination of outsourcing or automation or generative AI or whatever you're going to use to solve it. So that is a really important discipline to have if you want to avoid falling in this trap.
Yeah, cool. A quick pause here. I wanted to tell you a bit about why I started my software staffing company, Scalable Path. Back in 2008, I was working on a client project with some developers in Argentina, and I saw how amazing it was working with people in my time zone who were just as available as people in my office. So in 2010, I started Scalable Path to help companies take advantage of this underutilized talent pool. And since then, we've built a platform of over 40,000 developers, and we've placed over 600 of them with over 300 clients. So if you're looking to hire top-notch dev talent at a fraction of the cost of hiring locally, visit scalablepath.com/commit. And as a listener of the podcast, you can get 20% off your first month. I'd love for you to give us a try. So this next question is sort of your transition into Incorruptible, because I think you started to touch on it, some of that people wanting money to go up. And have that thing you're calling, what is it? The gravity? What is the term?
Financial gravity, yeah.
Financial gravity. But another case from the lean startup that you mention as a success story is Groupon.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we all know that that company pretty much imploded. They lost 96% of their market value. What happened to Groupon? And was this story at all one of those stories that led you to write Incorruptible?
Yeah. It's in a category of companies of which Incorruptible is loaded with these kind of stories. And I'll never forget when I wrote the Lean Startup. I remember when I first was showing it to test readers before I'd published it. This is 15 years ago now, 16 years ago. I remember one test reader said to me, "Why don't you have more stories of failed startups in here?" And I was like, "Oh, don't worry, I do. We just don't know which ones yet." Do not worry. We got that well covered. You write about entrepreneurship, you are guaranteed that companies are going to collapse after you write about them. It is the curse of writing about a category of companies that are like the fruit flies of modern business. Just they're very short-lived on average. So I I'm not embarrassed about it. I knew that was going to happen. I didn't know which company would collapse. I knew like there's no way to do it. And it's a mistake to think that just because you write about a company, therefore you're endorsing that company as perfect for all time. The companies are in there to illustrate a specific concept, not to say that this company will never make a mistake in the future. But it's interesting. Groupon is the perfect transitional case between these two books. You're absolutely right. And I know Andrew Mason, the founder, pretty well. And he told me this story one time of, for those who don't know, Groupon was this company that rose to tremendous prominence by sending you one daily deal each day. So they would go find a local vendor and they'd be like, hey, if we brought you 100 customers, would you give us a special deal? And then they get the special deal and they send it out to their customers. Everyone opts into the special deal. It was a very cool economic model. And it's a shame that it collapsed because it's such a big discovery, like service discovery is still such a huge unsolved problem even today. And as Google is setting itself on fire, and they're going to start charging for ads in ChatGPT, like we don't really have a good solution for helping you discover products and services you didn't even know you needed. So Groupon was a cool concept. And I remember Andrew Mason told me the story this way. He was like really adamant for its whole life that we've only sent one email. That's our whole thing. That's the promise we make to customers. We send one email. But he tried to build an ROI based, just, data driven, best practices kind of management culture in the company, which is what everyone's supposed to do. That's why they're the best practices, except that many of today's best practices are actually value destroying, as we'll get to. And he didn't know this. So one day he was like, I can't remember if it was his team first suggested or a board member suggested, somebody eventually came to him and was like, look, why don't we test out sending 2 emails a day? I think we'll make more money. And he's like, I don't think it's a good idea. People are going to be annoyed. Like, but didn't you say we're supposed to be data driven? And didn't you say we should experiment and test? And And they just ground him down. It's like, fine, we'll run the experiment. We send 2 emails a day. Well, guess what? If you send 2 emails a day, you make more money. Just 100% guarantee. That's just the law of email marketing. So they made more money. Everyone's, ooh, this is a success. Now, Groupon at this point's a public company. Quarterly pressure. Shareholder, fiduciary duty to the shareholders. So everyone's starting to talk about, well, you know where this is headed? If 2 emails a day, it's good. Why don't we try 3 emails a day? And he couldn't fight it. He tried really hard. He was like swimming upstream. But the gravity, the temptation to do this was just enormous. Well, turns out if you send 3 emails a day, it's better than sending 2 emails a day. You make more money. If I can send 3 emails a day, what about 4 emails a day? And there's no limit. The modern, addictive, rapacious energy that we have around making number go up is so intense. Once you start, Jim Senegal, the founder of Costco, literally called it heroin. Once you start raising prices, once you start betraying that trust with customers just to make your quarter, to make a little short-term profit, you do it once, first hit's free, and then you want to do it a little more and a little more. And worst is now the expectations of extra growth that causes Wall Street to bake that into your forecasts. Now it's harder. Now every quarter, you just made every quarter in the future that much harder for yourself. Unless, well, if we have 8 emails, what if we add 9 emails? And so Groupon became a spam engine, just spamming the crap out of its customers. And of course, I said there's no limit, but there is a limit. Eventually people get fed up with it. You burn through the trust you've accumulated and they all start canceling and unsubscribing. The thing completely collapsed. Mm-hmm. So that is a really important cautionary tale, and it's not just about Groupon. That exact story with the email sending, I know multiple companies that have fallen into that trap. It's actually email sending is a particularly damaging thing. People run into that trap with such dumb things, with iPhone notifications or anything. But of course, the real damage comes with so many companies that are doing things far worse than sending too many emails. John Kay, the economist, tells a story in one of his books about going to he took a friend to a favorite restaurant. And I can't remember if it was him or the friend. They went there. They hadn't been there in a little while. They go to the restaurant. They sit down, and the friend is really kind of visibly annoyed at everything. Just annoyed at the server, annoyed at the food. And he takes one bite of his entree, and he starts going on his phone. And he's like, "Hey man, you're being kind of rude. Just give me a second." And he's like, "Yep." And he pulls up his phone. He's like, "Yep, this restaurant was bought by private equity. I could taste it." Okay.
Wow.
We've all had that experience. I have literally sat in a restaurant. I won't say which one it was. I literally sat in a restaurant and I had to Google. I was like, did something go wrong here? What has happened?
Well, that's funny. My favorite restaurant in the world was this little place in Markleeville, California called Stonefly. And it was owned by a couple. and they had a wood-fired oven, and they sold. And I was so excited to go back there, and I got there, and I look at the menu, and it says, our wood-fired oven steak with Jack Daniel's sauce. And I was like, no, no,
No.
no.
Yep.
And that was it. I was like, this is not my favorite restaurant anymore. So, I mean, I've had that experience. It wasn't private
we've
equity,
all
but it
had
was
it.
somebody who was selling out for that,
Totally.
whatever they get, cheaper booze from whatever.
For
because
whatever.
they put
It's
that
like,
on
it's
there.
so easy because the first time you do it, you're like, let's just use slightly less quality ingredients. And the first time you do it, it's free. You get free money. And you're like, ooh, what if I screw them over a little more and a little more? And just like next thing you know, you've lost everything that made the thing special. And again, you need to have these collapses. What is happening? It was I think it was Rory Sutherland, the behavioral marketing guy. He had this great rant he was going on. I can't remember where it was. I saw it in a video maybe, and he was talking about how only family-owned businesses can resist this temptation. So like, you've had these examples of like Ford, right, or Toyota, where like the family has handed down stewardship of the thing over multiple generations. And he's listing out company after company after company. It's like, if you're a public company, if you fall into the normal best practices of our business culture today, you just can't do it. Eventually, the temptation to screw people over is too great. Unless you're this, and he's giving these family-driven examples. At the end of the video, he's like, oh, and also Costco. For some reason, Costco also is just like this. Anyway, moving on. He just mentioned it in passing, and I was like, that's my point. If it was true that these forces were inevitable and there's nothing you could do about it, it was just human nature being greedy, and there wouldn't be these exception companies. But there are. So the critical idea in the new book is twofold. One, we have to show how most founders, leaders, technologists, we are way too naive about these forces. Okay, we do not understand how easy it is to lose what made something precious, and frankly, to have it stolen from you. Because the more valuable it is, the more valuable it is for someone to steal it. But that this is not a law of nature, but a particular artifact of the messed up business and legal climate that we live in today. And therefore, it is possible to resist it. It is possible to follow the path of these exceptional companies that have found another way forward. So corruption is all around us, and yet it is resistible. We can build organizations that are incorruptible.
Do you want to dive? I mean, I know you want people to ultimately buy the book and read the book, but like, do you want to go in a little bit deeper about like what you think the solutions are to this?
Yeah.
These forces. Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, of course, like, I'm not really a short form is not my specialty. It took me like quite a few pages to write this down. So I'll do my best to kind of give people a flavor of it.
Yeah.
And the first thing I'll say is the promise I make to the reader in this book is that every technique, every single one, is a achievable, real technique you can use today. They are, for the most part, backed up by extensive research that shows that they work. And every single one, I have live case studies to show it in action of real companies. So there's nothing hypothetical in this book at all. And there's no policy anything. I made the conscious choice to not get into that stuff. So there's nothing like, well, after they change the laws to be XYZ, then we can do whatever. No, everything uses the tools of our economic system as it exists today. And there are basically two halves of the story. The first half is what I call the path of ethos, to build something worth protecting. Like the family restaurant you're talking about, they cultivated a particular way of doing things over the course of the life of that organization that allowed you as a customer to feel, you were able to feel that there was something special going on here. We've all had that experience with an organization that we love, either as an employee, as a customer, as an investor. You say, wow, you walk in the door and there's something special going on here. And in the book, I talked about Costco a second ago. I was talking about Patagonia as two really canonical examples of mission-driven companies that are so aesthetically different as to be unrecognizable. You walk into a Costco warehouse, you walk into a Patagonia store, people are like, there's something the same about it. And yet there is something the same. You walk in, you're like, I know exactly what this company stands for. And unlike a lot of companies that invest in slick marketing, but then the reality doesn't live up to the hype, these are companies where the ethos is woven into all the decisions they make. So it's like an operational discipline of aligning every resource, human, financial, social, brand, marketing, technology, everything is harnessed towards a common goal, a coherent goal. And the second part is what I was talking about before, that success attracts predators. So, unlike what we teach a lot of leaders today, success will not protect you. The more successful the thing you make, the more valuable it is for somebody to take it away from you. The more golden the goose, the more the temptation to butcher it. So we have to learn to build organizations that are high integrity. And I use the word integrity on purpose to mean both of its connotations, both the ability to keep a promise and structural integrity, the ability to resist outside pressure. For organizations, these two meanings are the same. You cannot make a promise you can keep unless you can resist someone outside showing up and forcing you not to keep it. So together, this coherent way of building internally and this structural way of building the exterior, I think those are the elements we have to add to our understanding of what today is called governance. And as soon as I say the word governance, my poor publisher is like, oh, please don't tell people it's about governance. Like, that sounds so boring. I know,
I
but don't
know.
worry. Lean Startup was about management. The Startup Way was about accounting, okay? Like, I have written these books that deep in their heart have these really boring topics that we have to tackle. But it's the very boringness of these topics that cause leaders to shy away from them and then get screwed. Because if you do not understand the governance of the organization you are at, then you are just a passenger in a car you think you're driving. And you have no idea what's going to happen. In fact, you may be the leader, you may be the owner, you may be on the board, you may have all the control in the world on paper, and yet you will not be the one who will decide this organization's fate. This mistake I see being made by founders all the time. So we have to learn how to change our ideas about governance to include things like coherence and integrity, and then to apply the techniques that I lay out in the book that are designed to first build mission-driven organizations and then to protect them for the long term.
And you mentioned the long-term stock exchange as one aspect of this. You know, from, talking to Gemini, I think I have an idea what some of these other things are. I think some of this is about the mission locked blueprint. Is that something that's in there? Is that a hallucination?
That is a hallucination. It is.
Oh my
That's
God,
a
that
classic
is
Gemini
so
hallucination.
funny. Okay.
That's okay. It is a combination of two different things which are in the book, and it's interesting. Like, God, you're producing just the best demonstration of LLMs, their strengths and their weaknesses.
Yeah.
So no worries. But yes, the blueprint is what I was talking about before, which is this ability to build a mission-driven company. And most companies that say they're mission-driven are really mission hopeful. So I'm like, no, yeah, not just like, oh, you hope, you think, you pray, you wish to be a good corporate citizen in the future. You intend to treat your customers well. Yeah, oh, great. Thanks a lot, buddy. What happens when private equity shows up? What happens when an investor pressures you? What happens? So none of that nonsense, but really organizations that are committed to making promises that people can believe and therefore are trustworthy. Trustworthiness, the most valuable and underrated asset in business today. That's the blueprint. The thinking about mission lock is one of the governance techniques that we talk a lot about in the book. I call it building a mission locked constellation. Mission lock is the phenomenon where what you think of as one entity, one company, is actually multiple organizations collaborating together. So, for example, people ask people like, what does Coca-Cola sell? And they're like, they sell soda. Nope. Not true. The soda is made by a bottling company, separate company. You ask, like, what does McDonald's sell? They're like, sell hamburgers. Not really. Most McDonald's are owned by independent franchisees. So there's lots of these examples. You think people think they know, like, that IKEA is a furniture store, but actually no, IKEA is a nonprofit foundation that owns the IKEA trademark and licenses it out to the actual stores. This pattern is all over modern business. Most things you think of as a company are actually a whole constellation of related entities. And that's before we even get to supply chain effects. Like, you go fly a plane. You are trusting your life to thousands upon thousands of people you have never met and whose names you will never know. It's not just Delta Airlines, but like, who trained that pilot? Who made the engine? Who bolted the things? Who did the safety check? Who's in the air control tower? Like, you think about the ripples out of all the people that had to collaborate, and you rely on it so easily that you do it without thinking. Same when you do to use almost any product in the modern world. Bruce Schneier calls this institutional trust, which is like the web of relationships that make that magic trick possible. The customer perceives it as one thing. You think, I bought a ticket from Delta Airlines. I bought an iPhone from Apple. Apple itself is made up of hundreds of subsidiaries all over the world. So the importance of mission lock is these constellations form all kinds of different ways. Sometimes they form in great ways, sometimes they form in really messed up ways. When they're mission locked, what it means is that all of the entities gravitationally like combine together, kind of like Voltron, to produce one coherent mission outcome, such that if one of the organizations tried to deviate or defect from the mission, the others would act like antibodies to pull them back rigidly into shape. So yeah, that's what the idea of a mission locked constellation.
Okay, thank you for that. There's something about ownership models in the book.
Yes.
You don't have to go too deep because I know, but can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, we talk a lot about alternative ownership structures. So today we live in a world of what's called shareholder primacy, where most people think that the purpose of a corporation is simply to enrich its shareholders. And we are taught that almost like it's a natural law, like that's how it's always been. That's what it's like essential to the nature of capitalism. Bullshit. Okay. If you have a window where you're sitting right now, if you look out the window, you can probably see a tree that is older than this idea. Okay. For the vast majority of the time that we have had capitalism in this world, this was not the idea. In fact, the vast majority of time we have had corporations in the world, it was understood that in order to form a corporation, it obviously had to have some kind of public beneficial purpose. And people who build things for a living, every technologist I know, everyone who builds things for a living, whether they work on the factory floor or they work in an IDE, it's the same. Believes that, yeah, of course, the reason we make organizations is to make things. Maybe we want to make things to make money, but like our idea is we create something valuable that creates a lot of value in the world. We capture some of that value for ourselves. I call that the builder's intuition. But we actually don't live in that world anymore. Our governance mechanisms and our financial system has been totally captured by this parasitical idea that actually no, all ways of making money are equally good, and the purpose of business is just to make as much money as possible. This is one of these like classic self-defeating ideas I talk about in the book. Joseph Schumpeter, the famous creative destruction economist, he warned this was going to happen. So it's not like some kind of crazy, unpredictable outcome, but we're in it now, and we have to get out of the grip of this totally crazy idea. So to do that, we have to be open to the idea that there are alternative governance forms out there that maybe we haven't heard of, but are not radical or new. The optical lens company, people who make the lenses in most of our glasses, Zeiss, had this structure in 1885. Okay, so this is not some like thing that no one's ever heard of, even though most founders, most leaders, most technologists have never heard of it. Just because it's new to you doesn't make it new. And what's cool about these alternative structures, we're talking about employee ownership, industrial foundation ownership, perpetual purpose trust, they go by different names and they're all slightly different from each other, is that we have enough of them in the world. They control, like, I don't know, depending on how you count, like roughly 5 to 10% of world GDP. So this is not like a small niche idea. Okay, these companies are all over the place. Co-ops, employee-owned trusts, foundation-owned companies, they're everywhere. Novo Nordisk was for a long time the largest company in Europe by market cap. I mentioned Patagonia. Costco has a $400 billion valuation. Like, this is not some niche thing. But there's enough of them that we have data, actual research about how these exceptional companies perform relative to conventional companies. And here's the thing that most people find hard to believe, because according to our modern finance theory, without the discipline of shareholder primacy, companies would be entrenched, low performance, inefficient. And as soon as I say it to you, like I'm like, hey, I'm going to have a nonprofit foundation own my for-profit company. Everyone has the same thought. They're like, oh, that's going to be totally super inefficient. They're going to be more concerned with value, so, with virtue signaling than with doing a good job, blah, 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 blah. It's like a very common set of beliefs. But we have enough of these companies in the world that they've been studied. Would you like to know what the studies say? The studies are unequivocally clear that this is a better structure. These companies are 6 times more likely to live 5 decades or more, from 10% to 60%. It's not some marginal advantage. 6 times more likely, and whatever financial metric you want to pick, return on invested capital, return on assets, even Tobin's Q, they're more likely to invest long term. They invest countercyclically during recessions. They are more likely, they have more stable earnings. They invest more in R&D. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. Employee ownership has been shown to be a source of tremendous competitive advantage, and there's so much data on employee ownership that we know that there's an incredible meta study that aggregated, I think it was like 55,000 companies worth of data on employer ownership in order to discover, is there a dose response like in a pharmaceutical? And there is. The advantages you see with employee ownership Literally, the more employee ownership you have, the more of those advantages you get. It's a linear response. The more you have them. So anyway, I bring this stuff up because most founders, most technologists, most leaders have never heard of any of this data or any of this evidence. And when they go to their lawyers and ask for advice about how their company should be structured, about the governance choices that they face, even just about like operational things about should I screw over my customers or not, they're being given a batch of advice driven by these best practices that are actually value destroying. So we as builders, we can't wait for somebody else to do this for us. We have to rise up and say, no, enough with these best practices. We are not going to follow them anymore. In fact, we're going to develop our own superior practices and start to endorse them so that the builder's intuition is defended across our entire economy.
Very cool stuff. As you may know, I run a vetted talent platform called Scalable Path, and I'm offering a 20% discount to listeners of the podcast. So if you're interested in scaling your dev team faster and smarter, visit scalablepath.com/commit. Okay, well, so are there any more points that from Incorruptible that you want to hit, that you want to tell people about?
Let me close with one idea that comes from one of the later chapters in the book. So people who just kind of skim the book casually might not get to this one, but it's one of my favorites actually in the whole book. So in the book, I tell every story just naturally from the point of view of the founder, because that's me. I'm a founder guy. Like, I like to found things. I like to help people found companies. So of course, like, every story is about the leader, the company, the CEO, the board, right? Like the senior people making this decision. And so every story will be like, okay, for example, there was this company, they're trying to create this incredible breakthrough technology. They were trying to recruit scientists from, tenured scientists from some of the most prestigious labs in the world. And they were having trouble recruiting those scientists because the scientists didn't believe that they were really sincerely committed to their mission. And they're trying to figure out what to do. So they came to me for advice. I helped them get their governance in order, and they were able to solve the problem. Now, who is the protagonist of that story? The way I tell the story in the book, of course, is the founder is the protagonist. He had the problem. He came to me. We solved it. But if you think carefully, you will realize that every story I tell in the whole book can be read backwards, in reverse, upside down, Alice in Wonderland Funhouse mirror style. Because who's the protagonist of the story? Well, another way to look at it is his employees are the protagonist. It's the scientists who wouldn't work for him that created the conditions that caused him to go seeking for solutions. And you'll see that in a lot of the stories in the book, the role of customers, of employees, of anonymous, faceless, individual people who had tremendous impact on the world is often overlooked because we live in a society that likes to tell great man stories instead of system stories. Mm-hmm. But both perspectives have their truth. And so the book is, of course, I hope people will find it first and foremost very useful in their positions of leadership. But I also want the book also to be understood and to be used as a shopping guide, as an employment guide, as an investment thesis finder, as a book that we all can use to shift the gravitational pull of the world towards human flourishing and away from the extractive practices that are celebrated today.
Cool. I'm a startup, founder myself. A lot of my customers, a lot of our audience are developers, they're startup entrepreneurs. I think a lot of this stuff sounds like super interesting and important, but a lot of people might be thinking like, when do I need to start worrying about this? Like at what size or what stage of your company does it make sense to be thinking about these concepts that you're introducing?
Totally. Everybody has the same reaction to these ideas the first time they hear them, which is like, oh, that's a big company problem. Like, I should be so lucky to get to worry about that someday. And unfortunately, lawyers and bankers and investors encourage this magical thinking, and it's so backwards. And I tell the story, one of the principles in the book is that it's always too early until it's too late. So if anyone's hearing this right now and they're like, oh, this seems like something I can put off till later, let me tell you some stories of people who put it off till later, and then later shows up and they're totally screwed. I'll give you one of my favorite examples. This is not in the book, actually. I had to cut this story, but it's sad but true. True story. I was helping a really awesome company raise money. I mean, really awesome. I love this company so much. They are in the aerospace company. They're doing something that's like would be so good for humanity if they managed to make it work. And it was hard. It was a hard science, hard engineering problem. So it was hard to raise money, but we figured it out. And we raised seed round, we raised Series A, raised Series B, and they found this really awesome venture investor who backed them to the hilt. And therefore, the investor was on their board. And they came to me. I met them when they first started the company very early. And we had the same conversation you and I are having today about all these techniques, being a public benefit corp, changing the voting rights, having the investors not have unnecessary vetoes over their future, whatever. And they said, okay, yeah, we're going to do all that stuff. And they talked to their lawyer, and their lawyer was like, it's kind of early to worry about this stuff. You can always do it later. So they put it off. Several rounds in, this was in the 2022 downturn, I think, venture ecosystem collapses, and they're having a really hard time raising money now. Meanwhile, this awesome venture firm that had been their ally this whole time, the partners in the firm have a civil war and go to war with each other and get in a big fight, and half the people quit and the other half remain. Well, guess what? The partner that was our favorite person was in the losing faction, and he's gone. One day, he's just gone. And a new person is on our board. And we're like, who the hell is this guy? And he's like, hi, nice to meet you. I hear you guys are trying to raise money. He's like, I have a veto over any money you raise. They're like, okay, sure, yeah, true. He's like, great. So if I let you raise this money, what's in it for me? And they're like, are you offering to raise? And so, I'm not investing. No, screw you, I'm not investing. I just want to know, if I let you invest, what are you going to do for me? And they're like, well, we're a big portfolio company of yours. You're going to make a lot of money. He's like, yeah, but I get that anyway. So what's in it for me? And they called me panicked, like, what can we do? He's holding us hostage. And I'm like, well, did you do all that stuff we talked about? Being a mission-driven company and all that? And they're like, no, we put it off. We're like, can we do it now? No, because you gave this guy a veto. He's got a veto over everything you want to do. You owe him, and guess what? You're going to have to pay him off. It's too late. And it was really painful. We had to go negotiate with that guy, and it was god awful, and it was so unnecessary. If it had just been set up properly from the beginning, we could have avoided that. And I could tell you hundreds and hundreds of stories. The book is loaded with them, of people who thought they had more time, who thought they could wait, who thought they could figure this out later. In fact, there are several stories in the book of people who tried to solve this problem only at the end of their life, when they're nearing retirement or even beyond. And I tell some positive stories of people who did manage to get it done. There's one story in the book of someone who managed to convert the structure of their company literally 2 years before they died. So just barely in the nick of time. But we also have stories in there of people who didn't get it done in time and were forced into retirement, forced out of the company, lost control of it. And of course, when that happens, generally corruption swiftly follows. So yeah, If you remember nothing else from this conversation, remember it is always too early until it is too late.
Good advice. So, it sounds like, and you're an author, but you consult with these companies as well.
Yeah, I do a lot of different stuff now. Yeah, I'm an investor. I'm a founder.
Okay.
I advise a lot of companies. I spent a lot of time in my past life, because of the successful lean startup, doing a lot of corporate consulting. And, it's interesting. The most common meeting I have in my life is someone coming to me for advice about how to start or revitalize their company. And those are not my clients. They're just people that reach out to me because they heard, a friend of a friend told them I'm the guy you talk to about this kind of stuff. And sometimes that leads to really cool stories and really cool opportunities to be an investor or advisor or been on a board or whatever. I tell some of those stories in the book. But oftentimes it's just a chance for me to pay it forward and say thank you to all the people that helped me when I was starting out, and pay that forward to other entrepreneurs, which I really enjoy doing.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and, sharing what's in your new book, and I'm excited to read it myself. How do you want people to reach out to you if they do want to connect with you?
Sure. The best way is just to go to incorruptible.co. That's where you can find out all about the book. You can get there's all kind of cool pre-order bonuses. You can figure out where to buy it at your local independent bookstore, or of course, if you want, on Amazon, it's available ebook, hardcover, and audiobook. Of course, May 26th is the release date. You can sign up for my mailing list there and get all my contact information that way. If anyone wants to get in touch, or you can follow me. I'm mostly on Blue Sky as well as the other social networks. Feel free to reach out to me any of those places. I'm always happy to hear from people who find the ideas useful.
Awesome. Well, Eric, I love the ideas that you're bringing to the table, and that it's a tall order trying to take on the whole financial system, how it, that's what a force to go against. But I commend your efforts.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right. And thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Take care.
Okay. See ya. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Commit and Push. If you found it valuable, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you're building a team, check out scalablepath.com to find top developers. Until next time, keep building, keep pushing.